Man, I'm out here biting kneecaps. I'm ready to go. What's cool and what's going on? Detroit Lions fans, it is time. The waiting is over. We're going to go through this roster, talk about strengths, weaknesses, what do they need to do to improve, and we'll get into a free agency strategy and a mock draft for the football team. Let's go. So it's time to establish the roar. Let's talk about the roster and start off with the offensive tackle room. It's a very good one. You got Panay, Hulk, Sewell. Let's go, baby. That's what I'm talking about. I like to call him the Hulk because the dude is a monster and he is one of the best tackles in the NFL. You got Taylor Decker at left tackle, who's also not too shabby himself. He's had his moments, of course. He's not an elite left tackle, in my opinion, but he's a very good one, and he's one that's you should definitely start. You feel good about it. I'll tell you that right now. So he's under contract, too. They gave him a bit of an extension. So having Decker and Sewell both as your bookend tackles, I feel very good about that. Now, depth-wise, is this a draft need? Is this something they need to look at? No, I think they're in a really good spot here. My recommendation would just bring back good old Dan Skipper. Let's go. And he got a touchdown this season, too, which is awesome. Always love to see those big man touchdowns. Anyway, you got Giovanni Banu, who they traded up for in the fourth to go out and get him. And from what I saw in the preseason, he's got some talent, man. He's got that size and he's got some athleticism. Just needs to get better with his hands, the punch and stuff like that. I think his technique's got to get better. Ultimately, I imagine he'll be the long-term swing tackle for this football team. You got Kobe Sorsdahl as well to be another dude in the room. Maybe Connor Galvin can be another guy from Baylor. Maybe, who knows? We'll see. Anyway, he was on injured reserve this season. In general, though, this is just bring back Dan Skipper, or if you wanted to upgrade there, if you feel like, but I think you bring back Dan Skipper, the work ethic he's got and what he means. I think that you bring him back to the room, and this should be a run it back with a good offensive tackles position. Let's move into the interior, where this could be a little more of a shuffling. We could have some interesting decisions to be made here, and it starts with Graham Glasgow. Could he be a cut candidate after this season? He struggled, especially at the end of the season. This was not his best year, kicking over to the left side this season compared to playing right guard last season. So maybe they say, look, you know what? Maybe let's try to get you back over to the right side. It really is going to depend if they bring back Kevin Zeitler or not, because that's really where he's played. So those are some decisions. I would still keep Graham Glasgow because the money you would save would not be worth that with the swing ability that I'd rather pay him the $7 million cap it or whatever. I'm not exactly sure how much free cash is going of that. Nonetheless, Glasgow is worth that money just for the swing ability with the injuries. And, Frank Ragnow's had some injuries. So having somebody that can play center, play guard is ever valuable for them. Now, backup-wise, Christian Mahogany from Boston College looked really good when he had to step in for Kevin Zeitler. So I'm excited to see what he brings to the table. And that's another thing, too. You go into next season, if you bring back Kevin Zeitler, then you're looking at your group of Christian Mahogany and Graham Glasgow competing for that left guard position. And that is actually a really good scenario for this team and something I would definitely consider doing in trying to bring back Kevin Zeitler because he was really good. He was a rock at that right guard position. I mean, it helps when you're next to Frank Ragnow and Penei Sewell. I mean, I'll be real. So there's that. And maybe they're saying, you know what, is it worth the money? I could totally get that. He's going to be, 34 years old. So that's why they will have to make that tough decision. If you can, as long as he doesn't break the bank, if he's in that $7 to $8 million range, they have the cap money to do that. So I would try to keep him around. And it's just going to come down to if they were to bring in a Myles Garrett, then they would probably have to let go of a guy like Kevin Zeitler. So that's just, something with their cap. But if they don't bring in someone like that, then I don't see any reason why they can't bring back Kevin Zeitler. And then you have Mahogany and Glasgow compete for that other guard spot. So overall, this is a really good offensive interior. Just need to have a couple of questions. You're getting a little bit older. They still need to invest. You got Coyote Ashika, who they have had and, developing and still getting healthy and whatnot. So he's a guy that could end up being a long-term play for them too. You got Michael Neese in there at the center position. Kingsley Agoikin, more or less, might be the long-term backup center for them or even the long-term center. I've heard some good stuff out of him coming out of camp. He's a tough-nosed guy and has really put a lot of work effort into it. And Netane Muti, I still like him. You never know, okay? I still think he's a guy. Just injuries has been the problem. It's one of the reasons why I have him rated as lower because his availability is been such a big issue for him. But he is a good player. It's unfortunate, though. Anyway, in general, with this offensive line, I will be investing in it. And maybe this is not as early of a need. It just depends if Kevin Zeitler is back or not. If he's not back, then it's probably an earlier need. If he is back, and you're rocking with these four guys as your rotation, and then obviously Coyote Ashika can get in there too as a fifth guy, and we'll see if some other guys develop here like a Kingsley Agoikin, then it's not as big of a need. So that just comes down to what happens in free agency as we put this whole strategy together. In general, though, no matter what, I'll be investing in, and maybe they can go back into the 5th, 6th round and find another steal like they did with Christian Mahogany. On to the tight end room now, and it all starts with Sam Laporta, aka Sam Laporta Potty. Shout out, holla at you, John Kapler. Man, with the bad guy over there, Detroit Lions fan. What's going on? But we got Sam Laporta here, Brock Wright, both of those guys under contract. Now, Zane Zaletra is a exclusive restricted, so he'll be brought back more than likely on the cheap. I don't see why not, and they've said nothing but high things about him. So bring back Zalestra. You got Sam Laporta, Brock Wright. You need a little bit more depth, and that's going to be something I look at. Brock Wright, I believe, will be going to last year of his contract. So just finding a backup number 2 tight end later in the draft, that's really all this team really needs to do here. Just find a little bit of depth later on. Then we go into the wide receiving room, and this is a discussion with John Morton coming in over from the Denver Broncos, the passing game coordinator. I imagine he's going to want to add another weapon to this room, so I think that is something that we need to look at. Okay, I think it's a round 2 through round 4, maybe even 5 at latest type of need. Getting that bigger outside weapon. Tim Patrick is a free agent. He was really good this season for them, and I would recommend bringing him back. You still have to consider those injury risks with Tim Patrick. So that's why I would say that they need to draft somebody to be able to develop. Khalif Raymond took a bit of a step back in terms of the receiving production this season. Still a very good punt returner. However, as I talk about, I want to invest in this, and this is a sneaky kind of need for them as I went through this roster, finding that X style of receiver on the outside. It's not like the top priority or anything like that. They don't need to spend a first-round pick on it or even a second-round pick per se, but they could, depending on the board and who's available. I think it's very much in the cards for them to be looking in that day 2 range, early day 3 possibility to be that number 3 weapon for the future. But my recommendation here, bring back Tim Patrick, and you go into next season with Patrick, Jameson, and Amon-Ra, the Winged Dragon of Ra, as I like to call him, but I love it. And Khalif Raymond. They could cut him. They could save like $3 million. I don't know if it's worth it. He is a good punt returner. They could probably find cheaper options elsewhere, so that's something to keep an eye out on. He could be like an after the draft type of cut, possibly. Anyway, I would just keep him around, and you go from there. Al Robinson, at this point in his career, I know he brings a lot of leadership to the table. Ultimately, though, your hope is maybe Anton Green can step up or a draft pick, etc. Moving on to the ever-explosive and dynamic running back room that they have built here with Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery. Craig Reynolds has been a solid third piece when he stepped up for David Montgomery's injury. And then Sion Vaki from Utah, who they drafted and has been a little bit of a interesting prospect coming over from as a safety. I like him a lot. I think he is a really good running back to keep an eye out for this team going forward, too, who could end up being their long-term number 3. Anyway, I would just say this room is really good. You could draft somebody to be able to develop. Since Monty is going to last year of his contract, maybe we're trying to find more of a between-the-tackles runner at the end of the draft. This is not an early need, but in this draft class, maybe you can find a steal at the end to be able to, long-term wise, be somebody that can compete for a third or second spot even. You never know. On to the quarterback discussion. Jared Goff. What do you do, right? No, there's nothing here that we're doing. Jared Goff showed that he was a little human there at the end in the playoffs versus the Commanders, but the team was so banged up, and that's why I'm not like overly exaggerated or overly worried about that. Jared Goff is a very good starting quarterback. He is a top 15 quarterback. I don't think he's elite, but he's got that grit, and he is just somebody that understands how to play football. He knows how to get the ball to his playmakers. He's typically a good decision maker. Now, sometimes he'll have his moments. There are games throughout the season where it's like, you know what I'm saying? But in general, Jared Goff, a very good starting quarterback and somebody that you keep around. He's under contract, so this is not any sort of move that we're looking to do. It just comes down to who's your backup. Do you feel comfortable with Hendon Hooker? I've heard mixed reports on him, like, we'll see. They brought in Teddy Bridgewater, which tells me that they don't feel overly confident about that. And Bridgewater's a free agent. He might go back to high school coaching, so I'm not probably going to predict that Bridgewater comes back. If he wants to come back, I'm fine with bringing him back. No problem with that. Overall, though, finding that backup, if Hendon Hooker, if you don't feel like he is the backup for the long haul, that could be the only question here. Overall, and you got Jake from State Farm. So, yeah, anyway, I would just say that's their biggest question mark at the quarterback position. Do you want to find somebody if you don't feel confident with Hendon Hooker? On to the defense side of the ball, and starting off with the edge rushers, which this was one more banged up position. The defensive line got so injured, unfortunately. His team in general got so injured on the defense side of the football, which made it really challenging. Aiden Hutchinson, you lost arguably the best edge rusher in the NFL. Like through that first quarter of the season, I think he was the most dominant player in football. I think he was the best player in football. I would have given him the MVP in that first quarter of the season. He was that big of a dominance factor. So it was unfortunate because he was on pace for like 20 plus sacks and 150 pressure, which would have been insane. Anyway, getting him back will be a huge boost to this edge room alone. So that will fix a lot of their problems in terms of the pass rush. Zadarius Smith is a discussion we have to talk about because his contract is a little funny, the way the Browns did it and the way you see these contracts nowadays. But there is basically, if he is around come the start of the league or start of the NFL season, you'll be on hook for a $5 to $6 million option bonus that would be fully guaranteed for 2026. So even if he wasn't on the football team, that would be a dead cap charge on their books. Now, I still think it's worth it because in a roundabout way, it's $11 million of cash that he is getting right now that they are just spreading into 2 years. And you see that all the time. Here's something that they could do. If they don't feel confident paying him $11 million this season, they could get him in there and say, hey, look, can we restructure? Can you get you down to about $8, $9 million, save a couple of million off that cap? And that, I think, is the more likely scenario than cutting him and just letting him go. Okay, I think they would work out a restructure in that regard, getting that cap or that cash out to be only around 8 to 9 million because that probably is more of a fair range. With that being said, though, he is a good player and I would bring him back. Like he was definitely a dude that he was their best pass rusher once Aiden Hutchinson went down, getting him in a trade from the Cleveland Browns before the deadline. Marcus Davenport unfortunately got injured too. Again, I don't think they bring him back this season. It could bring him back cheap. It is an option. However, he's just shown too many injuries. I think that they're going to look for more reliability elsewhere. At least that's my guess. Pascal, nice solid backup. I don't see him as a full-time starter, but as a good backup, I'm cool with that. Alquin Muhammad also worked into as a nice backup for them. He was actually also one of their better pass rushers with all the injuries. And Trevor Nowalski, also love him, man. He's a guy like a Sam. I clumped him in here. You could even clump Derek Barnes in here a little bit before he got injured. Barnes is like their Sam linebacker. They can play on the line, helping run defense, get after the quarterback as a pass rusher. Same thing with Trevor Nowalski, who really stepped up and surprised me, man. He made some plays this season, so keep an eye on him. I think he's definitely worked into a nice rotation. He's a exclusive restricted. He'll be back, no problem. Besides that, though, you got Jonah Williams. Maybe they bring him back on the cheap. I could see him being a guy that they bring back as a competition in training camp. I don't know if he'll make the ultimate, if he'll make the roster or not. Anyway, like they're going to bring in some dudes, and that's what I'm looking to do. I think this is an early need still in the draft because even though Zadarius Smith is under contract this season, I don't rely on him as a full-time player at this point. I think they need to add to this room and find that 1-2 punch with Hutchinson. Now, is it a first-round need? Do they have to pick this? Are they forced into taking somebody at that first overall pick? Then no. That's what I would say. But if you find somebody you like there, I would take somebody at that first overall pick, especially in this draft class where there's a lot of guys that I think are really good in that late first round, early second round range that they could acquire and get. Overall, though, if they bring in Myles Garrett in a trade, then that would change everything, and they certainly could do that, which I wouldn't hate by that any stretch. It just comes down to that draft cost. I'm not going to project that. We'll see what happens. If that were to happen, then I will do an adjustment to this mock draft. On to the interior of the defensive line. Kind of said the offensive line. I know I was shaking. I tried to slip that one through if you couldn't tell, but whoop. Anyway, we go and talk about this. Aleem McNeil, unfortunately, tore his ACL at the beginning of the end of the season, which sucks. It really sucks. So he's going to be out for a good chunk of next year. Hopefully speedy recovery there. They need him. He's really developed into a star and somebody that is one of the better interior football players. So getting him back later in the season for a playoff push will be huge. And as you can see with the rest of these injuries too, Mekhi Wingo, Kyle Pecco, John Kaminsky all being injured. It was so banged up, this defense line, unfortunately. Anyway, going forward, and I also do want to mention, I have them listed as a 3-4, but there are multiple defense. And I imagine that Kelvin Shepard, the new defensive coordinator who was formerly the linebackers coach for them, he's going to play a multitude of defenses as well. I just line it up this way to showcase some of those things on the defense side of the ball that they like to do, but they'll have a base 4-3 end sometimes, along with an Aiden Hutchinson who's going to rush the passer, and then they'll sometimes have like a Sam linebacker out there and like 3-4 looks. So they change things up out there on that defensive line. Now, talking about what they need to do going into the offseason and the draft, DJ Reader is under contract for one more season, but that's the thing. They need to invest in here. I don't know if they're going to give him a contract extension. He's been solid, but will he get an extension? That's going to be something that's tough. Now, Broderick Martin has not worked out for them, and that could be a bit of a draft miss here, and that's fine. It happens. We'll see. Okay, I want to see one more season of him and what he can develop, but I will be investing in this. This is something that I see maybe not a first or second round need, because I think you can find some nose tackles, one techs that can stop the run later in the draft. So this is more like a fourth, fifth, sixth round type of need, in my opinion. You've got your star pass rushers here. Levi Onwuzurike, I would try to bring him back. I know the injury thing is a concern with the neck, but it seems like he's past that at this point. And I also don't think he's going to get Milton Williams or Osa Digazua type of money. So I would try to bring him back for somewhere around that $10 to under $1 million range for a couple-year contract. Not a ton of guarantees behind it. If you can bring him back, though, then I feel much better, especially with Aleem McNeil going to be injured for a good chunk of the season. They're still going to need to add to this room. Now, I'm very confident in Mekhi Wingo. He was a guy that I had a huge draft crush on, and I thought that they got a major steal, just like with Christian Mahogany on. And from what I saw, I thought he looked good as a rookie. So that's why I'm actually not as concerned watching some of the film with these guys. They just dealt with so many injuries, and that's why the defensive line really went to shambles at the end of the season. But when they get healthy, Mekhi Wingo back. I would bring back Kyle Peko too. I thought he was a really good run defender for them. You could bring back John Kaminsky. I'm okay with that. That's not a big deal. Patrick O'Connell, also another guy that they could bring back on the cheap. We'll see what they decide. They're probably going to have to let go like one or two of the guys. In general, we'll see how that all works out. My view on this, though, is priority one, bring back Levi Onwuzurike. He'll be huge for them. Fill in for Aleem McNeil as the starter. Afterwards, I would say draft somebody to be a future nose tackle to develop behind DJ Reader, especially if they don't feel confident in Broderick Martin. Those are the two things that I feel like they need to approach. Maybe even pick up another veteran that can be a pass rusher to fill in for Aleem McNeil, at least to some depth, if you don't feel confident in Mekhi Wingo. Personally, I feel confident in him, but that's going to be something down to the coaching staff. And then we go on to the linebacking position here, Captain Jack Sparrow. No, Captain Jack, but hey, he was really good this season. He's starting to develop into a full field number one linebacker for this football team. Yeah, he still needs to get better in coverage. In general, though, he was very good this year. He was one of the best in terms of reading and reacting linebackers that I saw in the run game. Just made plays consistently at the line of scrimmage. You had Alex Anzalone, who did get injured, got banged up. He came back at the end of the season, and he is still under contract. I expect him to be back because he is also a very solid linebacker too. So, and he's a tough-nosed guy that's worked very hard to earn his way out here, and the staff loved him. So I'm not cutting him. I'm not moving on from him. The question just comes down to the future, and they need to invest. So that's why I say this could be a third, fourth, fifth round type of need to find some youth. And somebody that I would look for here is somebody with a little more coverage ability, someone with a little bit more ability to cover in man. That's something I feel like they need, especially if they're going to continue to play a lot of man coverage. I'm going to try to find a linebacker who can play a little bit, has a little more loose hips, because that's not really Jack Campbell's strength. So that's my only nitpick with this linebacking room. But you talk about Derek Barnes, I do think he's a priority re-sign. Shouldn't be super expensive to bring him back either, but what he brings as a Sam linebacker is really nice for this team. Now, Kevin Shepard will have a decision to make because he is going to be the DC now. He's going to be filling in for Aaron Glenn. Maybe he won't want to play a lot of Sam linebacker. Maybe he'll just want another edge rusher instead. So those are schematic things that I am not sure what he wants to do personally. I need to give him a phone call. Hey, what do you want to do, Kelvin? What you got? But anyway, that's not going to work out. That is just something I would say for right now, bring back Barnes. And then Rodriguez coming back from injury will be nice. There are some decisions. Jalen Reeves-Maven, I thought, struggled a little bit at the linebacker position. He is a good special teamer, but I didn't see him much at special teams this year. He did come in off an all-pro special teams year. Maybe they bring him back, but he could be a cut candidate. You got Nyman, you got Turner. They could bring back both of those guys on the cheap. Don't see any issue with that. Turner's a good player, and so is Nyman as special teams and whatnot. Pittman, I could see them bringing him back as special teams. He's a solid player on there. Deron Gilbert, watch out for him. I do like him. I think he's a guy that could be a sneaky, versatile guy. He's kind of like a hybrid safety linebacker. Could be a little bit of a mismatch for them, and he could also cover some guys in space and whatnot. So overall, I would just say this is a draft mid-round range type of need for them for the future. So with somebody with some coverage ability. On to the cornerback room now, and Carlton Davis, unfortunately, got injured at the end of the season, a broken jaw in the Buffalo Bills game, right? It's unfortunately, again, just it's rare things that happen. Davis, got to bring him back. This is priority number one in this cornerback room. Bring him back. Pay this man. Now, don't pay him crazy amounts. Okay, I'm not talking $18, $19 million, but I'm saying like 13 to 15 million range. I'm cool with that. He is worth that type of money. Even with the injuries, he is a little injury prone. You're going to have to expect him to miss a couple of games each season. So that's why I would emphasize bringing back like a Kindle Vildor. And we'll see about Enos Rakestraw and how his development goes. And I wouldn't cut Armeek Robinson or any standards like that. So just bring back some of those guys as some depth. My one recommendation here is just bringing Carlton Davis back in the depth, and they should be able to run this back. It's a good room with a lot of potential. Now, Arnold's got to get a little bit better. He had his moments this season, but he was also good. I thought he was good at times. He did struggle at times. So there was just things, growing pains as a rookie. I thought he got better, though, as the season progressed, and that's one thing I want to see. Armeek Robinson was a really nice slot corner. He's another feisty, small, but feisty guy. And besides that, Brian Branch can also play a little slot corner, too, for them. So, I would probably, they're going to move on from Emmanuel Mosley. It just hasn't worked out, the injuries, unfortunately, with him. Big thing will just be that Enos Rakestraw, the development there, and same thing with Terrion Arnold. And finally, with the roster, let's talk about the safety room. It's one of the best in the NFL, if not the best in the NFL. You got All-Pro Kirby Joseph. You got an All-Pro in Brian Branch. I mean, these two guys are studs. I mean, they really are. The only question I have is Afeti Melifonwu. Good player, don't get me wrong. But the injuries, it's a concern. He's had one healthy season in, 2023? So that's a problem. If you can't be available, then it really just doesn't matter. You know what I mean? So that's a huge question mark. They could bring him back on the cheap, and I'm all for that. If he wants to come back on a minimum, then bring him back. But I do think Aaron Glenn could possibly say, hey, come over to the Jets, you know what I'm saying? Or some team could lure him in as a lot of upside there that he could have, because he could be a starter for somebody else. It just comes down to the injuries with Afeti Melifonwu. Besides that, though, there's a lot of unproven talent with Strickland and Hallett, so finding some depth here, a draft pick, a free agent, those are things that I'm looking to do. This is not an early draft need. It's not really even possibly a draft need if they just want to address it in free agency. They just need somebody to be quality depth, especially if Brian Branch has to play in the slot a little bit more or whatever if they have injuries. On to the free agency strategy. I don't know what I'm doing, but we are going to talk about team cuts first up. Jalen Reeves-Maybin. They don't need to do this. There's some guys I'm going to highlight here. Jalen Reeves-Maybin, Khalif Raymond could be guys. We'll see how it goes, but I'm going to go ahead and let go of Jalen Reeves-Maybin. He will be, and that kind of rhymes too with Raymond. They got their Maybin and Raven. I'm getting all mixed up out here, but anyway, we're going to let him go. I just didn't feel like I saw him a ton this season, so we're going to save $2 million. It's not a necessity, as I talked about earlier. Just trying to find some cap space. They don't need tons of cap space, but trying to utilize what I can. $2 million is $2 million. On to the unrestricted free agency period and the team re-signs portion. Starting off on offense, I want to bring back Tim Patrick, 1 year, $3 million. I think that's a very fair contract. Now, if he wants more than $5 million, I probably would not bring him back for that, but I don't think he's going to command too much. And I imagine he wants to stay. I mean, I haven't heard any huge reports or nothing like that, but I think he wants to stay from all indications. 1 year, $3 million is a win-win scenario, and he's, really done a great job with Detroit. And we're also going to bring back Dan Skipper and Kevin Zeitler. Some offensive line depth with Skipper, and maybe even a touchdown, a little, magnet there, a little playmaking action. But Kevin Zeitler at right guard, let's keep him around 1 year, $8 million. Could be a little less, could be a little more. I would keep him, though, around that $8 million or less. That's where I feel confident in it. And bringing him back, he was so good at that right guard position. And then on the defense side of the ball, we'll start with the defensive line. I bring back Alquan Muhammad, who was a really nice pass rusher specialist for them and is as a good depth piece. Absolutely. I want to keep him around. Rotational player. He earned that right. Now, I did let go of Jonah Williams and John Kaminsky. I could see at least one of those guys coming back. We'll see how it all shuffles up, but I decided to let those guys go with Kaminsky's injuries and Williams. I just feel like maybe we can upgrade a little bit in the draft. And then interior defense line, I'm bringing back Levi Onwuzurike. Absolutely prioritizing. I couldn't let him go, especially since the elevations. Like we were so patient with the injuries with Onwuzurike. Could it happen again? Absolutely. But by giving him a 2-year deal, $18 million, it's not breaking the bank. If injuries go rise, you can figure that out from there. It's not a huge cap problem. Overall, I just don't think he's worth letting go out of the building. And then after those 2 years, that's when he could earn that big contract once you see the elevation and more. He's coming to the prime of his career, too. Kyle Pecco, Patrick O'Connell, bringing those guys back as some depth on that interior as nose tackles. And then you got Derek Barnes, Sam linebacker, bring him back, coming from injury. He'll want a prove-it-year deal. And then we got Carlton Davis and Kendall Vildor coming back in the secondary. Absolutely got to prioritize Carlton Davis. 3 years, $42 million, 100% worth that contract in my eyes. $14 million average. Even with some injury history, I'm cool with that. He is a number one level corner. He can handle number one wide receivers. Now, I did let go of Nyman and Turner. Once again, just like with Williams and Kaminsky, I could see them bringing back at least one of those guys. It's just going to come down to cap and who that, do they feel good about, possibly upgrading the draft and things like that. So we'll see how it goes. So those guys could be back at least for competition. And then finally finishing up with Khalil Dorsey, who's a great special teamer and a great kick returner. So good gunner. Keep him around for that purpose. Did let go of Feti Melifanu. Tough decision, but it was kind of what I had to do. And with the injuries, we're going to try to find a little more reliability. And before we get into the outside period, I do want to talk about restricted free agents. Now, I'm not going to mess with too much of this. I'm just going to bring back everybody. A lot of these guys, like some of them I know they're going to bring back, like Trevor Nowaski, Craig Reynolds, Shane Zylstra. I feel like all those type of guys they're going to bring back. Coyote Ashika, etc. Maurice Norris maybe too. But in general, I'm just going to re-sign these guys around $10 million. It's not all going to go toward the cap. It's like a top 53 anyway. They'll compete for roster spots. Some will get practice squatted, etc. But I'm going to be very conservative with this, $10 million. And that leads us into the free agency period. And I'm sorry, it's going to be boring here. I'm just going to sign Richie Grant as some depth at the safety position. 1 year, $2 million. He brings versatility, can play in the box, can play in the slot, play up top. So having him around, just give you a little more reliability in that safety position if you need to call upon somebody. And then we talk about $6 million for their draft picks. So yeah, I think that's a fair budget. And they could sign some other guys, and I think that is certainly in the capability. However, I just feel like it's going to be a nice, quiet free agency for them. Bring back our guys. We got a culture building here, and we'll go into the draft and continue that culture building. Now, with that being said, before we get into the draft, let's talk about the needs one more time real quick. Offensive line, I will be investing this. I think this is a mid to late round pick on the interior. I'll continue to invest in that guard position, but bringing back Zeidler, and then you have Mahogany and Glasgow competing for that other guard position. They're in a pretty good spot there. And Glasgow gives you that versatility, play center, play guard. And then tackle-wise, they're in a pretty good spot there. And maybe Manu steps up and develops into a good backup with Skipper. So I think offensive interior would be the bigger priority later in the draft to be able to find somebody to be maybe the long-term left guard. And then Mahogany could be the long-term right guard. Wide receiver, I think this is probably their biggest need on the offense, actually. Finding an X-style receiver. Well, it's not a first-round need. It is something we'll look at maybe day 2. I think there's some guys that fit the bill in that role that we can go out and add some more help there. Besides that, though, running back could be a late-round throw. Find another dude to develop behind Craig Reynolds and Sione Vaki. Not a huge need, though, there. They've got a really good running back room, and Jahmyr Gibbs, one of the most explosive. And not just explosive, but he was also really good between the tackles. I didn't mention that earlier, but Jahmyr Gibbs, he was incredible this season. And then on the defense side of the ball, my number one priority here is going to be finding another edge rusher, and then also finding a nose tackle to develop in there, maybe the mid to late rounds. I think that's where you can find a really good player in that role. It's like 4th, 5th round range. That's where a lot of the good nose tackles end up going, I feel like. But edge rusher, I do think is an early need. I think it's a 1st through 3rd round at latest, but I do think 1st, 2nd round, we can find a really good edge rusher with Zadarius Smith going into last year of his contract, and also probably can't play a full-time role, or you don't want him to play a full-time role maybe next season. So that's why I'm saying let's go ahead and address it. Let's add to it. Get somebody to be that long-term 1-2 punch with Aiden Hutchinson and on the cheaper contract. And we got good depth with Muhammad, with Pascal, Nowaski, who can play that Sam linebacker role as Derek Barnes can too. But that is something we'll look at. And then linebacker. I also want to address this. I think this is another kind of big-ish area. This is a future need, okay? It's not something they need right now, but it is something that we need to address, and we're going to be looking at and drafting and developing the mid-round range. Somebody with some coverage ability is what I'm going to be looking for. Cornerback-wise, I think they're in a good spot. I really do. You can always draft corners, absolutely, but I think they're in a good spot. Safety, I'll probably throw a late-round pick on this. I feel good, though. They've got 3 solid players in there, 2 studs, and a good backup with Rich. So after all that talking, I'm sure you're ready to go for the draft, and so am I. We're starting off with Nick Scordon, pass rusher, Texas A&M. This guy brings the M&Ms to the defensive line. He's a good pass rusher. I think he fits the Dan Campbell mold so much with the ability to he's a relentless motor guy. I also like Jack Sawyer here. I think he would be an excellent pick for them. But Scordon, Sawyer, getting one of those guys, the JT2MO I decided not to go with the Buckeyes, even though I don't think they care. I think they would have no problem drafting a Buckeye. Nick Scordon, though, the value at the end of the 1st round is excellent. He really brings a lot of power to his profile, and as another pass rusher in there, he's got some ability to turn the corner too. He's a loose athlete. He is not an elite athlete. That's going to be the big knock on him. And he's also a bit of a shorter arm guy, in my opinion. We'll see what he does check out at the combine. But he's just not overly physically dominant, right? He's not like Shamar Stewart is. But he's a lot more of a refined prospect than a Shamar Stewart is. And I also think he'll lose a little weight when he gets to the NFL level, and he'll get a little faster, get a little more explosive. So I actually think the upside on Nick Scourton is tremendous. He's one of the younger prospects in this class too. So it just makes too much sense to get him here in the first round. Get yourself a really good player. I think his floor is so high. So he's a former Boilermaker. So boiler up, let's go. Let's go on to our second round pick, Jack Besh. I've heard nothing but great things about Jack Besh. And on the field too, Besh is a monster. He's somebody that is a smooth operator in terms of the way he moves for his size. 6'1", 212 pounds. He's got NFL size. He's got NFL hands. He can block too. He showed it at the Senior Bowl. So I think he's a guy that comes in there, can be a developmental dude under Tim Patrick for a season, and also be in a good rotation, right? He's going to be that fourth guy for them. And then going into the long haul, now you have a group of Jack Besh, Jamison Williams, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. You have everything. You got your possession in Besh, you got your speed in Williams, and you got your beast stud slot receiver in Amon-Ra, the Winged Dragon. So you just got everything in this room for new offensive coordinator John Morton to be able to handle and deal with in this pass game, and also for Jared Goff, of course, in the offense. On to our third round selection. We're going with Chris Paul Jr., linebacker from Ole Miss. He came onto the scenes and really just came out from nowhere, in my opinion, but really was excellent for them this season. He is so good in coverage. He's got athleticism to move sideline to sideline. He can cover tight ends. He can cover running backs. He has the agility to do so. And he's also a tough-nosed guy. Dane Brugel the other day made a joke about this, but he has always got the dirtiest uniform. And at the linebacker position, I just love to see that. If you got the dirtiest uniform, I know who you are right then and there. So I want somebody like that. I want a dog for the long haul, for Jack Campbell. You still have Alex Anzalone, but you pair him up with Chris Paul for the future, let him develop and get a little stronger, because he is a little undersized at 6 foot, 224. He'll be a weak side linebacker for sure. On to the fourth round. We're going Jay Toia, and another UCLA interior defense lineman. Seems like they produce a lot of good ones. You go back to Kenny Clark. You look at Ogbonnia from the Chargers most recently, stepping up as one of the better run defenders. Now Jay Toia from UCLA. He is a guy that I do think he's got some steam coming off him. When it comes to the run game and the violence there, he has that. He can hold the point of attack. He is smaller, but 6'1", just under 6'2", 339 pounds. The guy you can see this dude out there. You know him. He's also got the long hair as well, but he is a monster as a run defender. Teams didn't really run against UCLA all that well because Jay Toia is one of those guys out there that just eats up blocks, and that's what I want him to do. He'll be a nice developmental guy and at least give you more competition with Broderick Martin. On to the sixth round, I'm going with Hayden Conner from Texas. He was next to Kelvin Banks over there at left guard. And it's just like Christian Mahogany. I think we're going to try to take a swing here in the sixth round, see if we can find another hit. It's not like they have to, but I'm trying to take chances out here. You could make the argument that we could go offense line earlier, and that's totally fine. I just feel like with Zeitler back, you got Glasgow who can play multiple positions, and with the emergence of Christian Mahogany, I almost see I don't want to stunt the development of Christian Mahogany. I want to give him a chance. So that's why I'm drafting somebody else here in the sixth round. Hayden Conner has a lot of potential as well. He's a strong guy. Does need to get a little bit better with his hand technique. I thought that was one thing he really needed to work on in the offseason when I did a full breakdown on him. But he does have the potential to be a very solid starter in the NFL for a long time. He's got all the traits. He's got all the tools. So we'll see if he can develop and get better and be a potential left guard for them. On to our first seventh round pick, Maliki Matavao from UCLA, the Bruin. We're going back to UCLA. Hey, we find a buddy with Jay Toia, and Maliki Matavao is going to be a nice backup tight end for them. Now, I do think his athleticism is a little limited. They were talking about his athleticism. I didn't quite see it at the Senior Bowl. I mean, he had some impressive reps, but I also thought he got covered a lot of times. However, there's still a lot to work with, and you go back to the UCLA tape, he's a physical presence, and I think he can be a good blocker. I think he's got a lot of potential to be a great number 2 tight end next to Sam Laporta, and just somebody you can develop behind Brock Wright. So getting him a little more depth at the tight end position. Next pick, we're going with CJ Baskerville, and I just love that name, Baskerville. It's like some place in the middle of nowhere where you see the castles and the lightning coming down from above the castle. That's kind of what that thinks, or something. I don't know, Hound of the Baskervilles. Maybe I'm thinking of a Sherlock Holmes sort of rendition. Anyway, I've not watched CJ Baskerville. I've just watched highlights, so take that with a grain of salt. But he's got tremendous size. And I'm thinking to myself, a guy that maybe could be an Ifeatu Melifonwu type of replacement, give you a little bit of jacket shawl trades. type of player. That's really what this is, and trying to help build up some depth in that room. Final pick of the draft, Montrell Johnson Jr. from Florida, the Gator. He is a good vision running back. He's going to be limited with his athleticism. He's not overly explosive, but I do think he's got some good contact balance. And he kept Trevor Etienne from seeing the field. So they, clearly like Montrell Johnson, and he was a solid runner there at Florida. So he can compete to be a third, fourth running back for this football team with Sione Vaki and Craig Reynolds. Well, that's going to do it here for our draft. Let's go and recap everything up and talk about what we did. Let's talk about coaching real quick, because this team does have a lot of transition. John Morton, the new offensive coordinator, coming over from Denver for a season with Bo Nix, and Sean Payton. He's got a lot of extensive experience with Sean Payton through the years. You go back to his days with the Raiders or the USC Trojans, passing game coordinator. So he worked with Mark Sanchez, actually, as a Jets fan. So that's kind of funny. But yeah, he's a guy that could really, be a good offensive coordinator for them. He's got a lot of experience here, and Dan Campbell's continually praised him when he was working with Dan Campbell for a few seasons too before. So he steps right into the offensive coordinator, should bring a lot of familiarity to this offense. I don't see, now they may throw the ball a little bit more. I do think that that's possible, but they need to make sure they rely on the run game. That has been something that he's gotten knocked for in the past, is maybe not running the football enough. With that all being said, I'm excited. I think he'll be a very solid presence. The foundation that they built in the room too will be very helpful. Defensively wise, you got Kelvin Shepard, the new DC for Aaron Glenn, former linebackers coach, and he did a great job with the linebacker position. So I feel very good. Now, I don't know a ton about what he's going to want to run. Will he want to run a lot of man coverage like Aaron Glenn? That's yet to be determined. Will he want to run a Sam linebacker? Well, that'll all be determined here very soon. So some scheme changes. I imagine he'll want to put his own emphasis on the defense. In general, though, there's just going to be a lot of up and down early on. You got to expect that. Look at the Eagles. When they lost both of their coordinators, it will take time. It's not something that's just going to be a seamless transition most of the time. Now, I imagine this organization, Dan Campbell, the way he is, Brad Holmes, the culture that they developed, should be very promising in that regard, but it is something to consider. Now, in terms of the roster, in terms of what we did and everything like that, offensive line, we invested in that a little bit later. Wide receiver was really my number one priority on the offense side of the ball. Getting a Jack Besh in here or somebody like that, you could get, there's a lot of guys that they can consider, but I feel like a Jack Besh would be a perfect addition. You can look at Jaden Higgins, just a bigger body possession style of guy is what I'm looking for here to develop behind Tim Patrick. He'll be that fourth receiver with Khalif Raymond, and then you can kind of go from there. Running back wise, it was a late round pick. It's not a necessity, but I felt like, hey, why not? They could also question the quarterback position if they don't feel confident with Hendon Hooker. Ultimately, though, I've decided to keep it where it's at. Maybe they'll figure that out, and that's something what they need to see in the locker room and in practice and stuff like that I can't necessarily see. And we got some more depth with Maliki Matavao at the tight end position. Defensively wise, I really prioritize that defensive line. Nick Scordon, who also could play a little inside out too. So that's another thing. He's going to help out that interior early on. If they need him to, he can play a little on that inside as a pass rusher for them. So that's another reason why I went with Nick Scordon. I think he really gives them some ability to play 4-eye, 5-tech. And then long term, he could play 7-tech too. He absolutely can. He can go stand up. He can go dirt in the ground. I thought his tape was good in both departments. So you get a guy that brings some versatility and will be a great number 2 pass rusher as that strong side end to go along with Aiden Hutchinson. We brought back a lot of depth with Muhammad. Smith is still here, as good of a pass rusher he is, and Pascal. And then, of course, Trevor Nowaski and Derek Barnes, if they do decide to keep those Sam linebacker role in where it was last season. Jay Toia will be a good developmental nose tackle. You got Kyle Pecco back, DJ Reader, and for one more season. So we need to think about that for the future, and that's hopefully what we did with Jay Toia. Didn't do anything in the cornerback room, but safety, we did add in CJ Baskerville, going to hopefully be like the Ifeatu Melifonwu replacement with his size. And Richie Grant in free agency was our only free agent pickup. But anyway, finally, we finished up with linebacker, and we got some help with Chris Paul Jr., who's going to be a good developmental coverage weak side linebacker to go along with Captain Jack. So that is what we did here. I hope you guys really enjoyed, and if not, let me know. Definitely hit me up. What did I do wrong? What would you do differently? Keep it cool, and though, I'll talk to you here soon. Let's go roar!